This is Viterbi Voices, your chance to hear stories about research, classes, student life, and more.
Directly from our students, faculty, and other members of our engineering community. All right here at the USC Viterbi School of Engineering.
Welcome back into Viterbi Voices. I am one of your co-hosts, as usual, Paul Ledesma, Director of Undergraduate Admission.
And my name is Audrey Roberts. I'm a junior studying mechanical engineering here at USC.
I think we should, address the elephant in the room. So we used to always have this intro going back to episode 1, where we said what episode number is going to be. And Audrey and I have made the decision over the last couple episodes, because, again, I don't know what episode this is going to be, to not do that, because we realized we kept messing it up, or something would go wrong in our release schedule, and we would have to fake it, and Audrey would have to do some serious editing to edit around what episode number it was. Yeah. So if you're, for the 10 of you that are diehard listeners, and you're used to that handoff of, I say, welcome, this is episode, and Audrey jumps in with number, because I'm awkward about it now. I think we did this last time, where it's what do we do? So we're not doing that anymore. And if you really care what episode number it is, it's in the title. But this is a fantastic episode.
Yeah, this is a good one. But no matter what number it is.
This is another one of our alumni series. This is Tracy Dooley, MD, Dr. Yes. Tracy Dooley. And Tracy is one of the original students that I started working with. So on that trend of these alumni old man reminiscing stories that I keep getting into. I've known Tracy for nearly 20 years now. She graduated with her bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering in 2002. She worked with me as a student ambassador in the first group of student ambassadors, worked alongside Ali Fakari and Jason Scott, who you've already met in the other episodes. And we're going to get more of that same class to do some future episodes. And Tracy went on to, just to give her a quick bio, because I think we kind of dove in too quickly, but to give her credentials up front. So BME, biomedical engineering in 2002, went straight to the Stanford School of Medicine afterward, graduated with her MD degree, and realized she didn't want to go down the residency route, didn't want to become a doctor, went into investment banking and mergers and acquisitions, then went to a medical technology company, then went into healthcare consulting, and is now doing venture capital. Yeah. And all related to health, entrepreneurship, just the idea of patients and providing new types of technology and innovation. And it's just this amazing, cool story where wherever she had a straight and narrow path of go do this, she said, well, I don't know, what if I tried this? and constantly bucked the trend. And what we discuss is this idea of rigor and reward.
Yeah, I think this is a great episode because, especially sort of in these two fields, I think kind of as someone who's closer to the student level, I think as engineers or perhaps pre-med students or both, it's really easy to be like, oh, I'm not going to med school, but for those I know, I'm going to med school, I'm doing my residency, whatever. And for me, as an engineer, I could be an engineer after school. So I think it's cool that Tracy had a lot of opportunities to do something that was pretty traditional, and then instead did something else because she kind of talked about caring about the team she worked with and then the people she impacted really is a driving factor. And I think that's super important because, at the end of the day, it really is all about people, right? It's not necessarily so much the day-to-day kind of work you're doing. It's more the impact you have. And I think it was super cool for me, at least, to learn from that. So.
Absolutely. So we'll get out of the way, but as a fair warning, we did this over a video interview, and so obviously Tracy was in San Francisco, and so she called in. So you'll notice some difference in the audio, but I think it turned out just great. Yeah. So let's get out of the way, and here's Tracy Dooley, MD. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I love your setup.
Yeah.
So dialed in.
I know. It looks a little funky now that I think about it when you're on FaceTime. Because obviously all you're doing is FaceTiming, but to us, you're hooked into our soundboard and everything. So welcome.
Gotcha.
It's good to see you. Good morning.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Do you have a big day planned?
Yeah, I'm really excited. Just meetings in San Francisco, But yeah, glad I was able to finally talk to you. So
Absolutely.
I love the podcast.
Cool. Well, Tracy, why don't you start out by introducing yourself and let people know, like, where you came from and how you found yourself at USC, et cetera.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Tracy Dooley. I'm BMEC of Biomedical Biochemical Engineering class of 2002. And I grew up in San Francisco Bay Area in Berkeley. And so I had a lot of friends when I was applying to college saying, you can go anywhere except for USC and Stanford. And clearly I didn't listen. But, I think from the first time I interacted with the folks at USC and Louise Yates, I mean, there was just really a different feel about it. And I really enjoyed my visit to the engineering school. And so...
What high school did you go to?
I went to San Domenico High School up in Marin County, and then I went to Beacon High School also in Alameda, which is a charter school.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
Yeah, a couple there.
And so then you came down here to USC. And I think there's a lot of people that make that transition from the Bay Area down to LA to come to USC. There's a lot of Bay Area folks here. But there's also, I think there's an unspoken, there's an unspoken difference. I think a lot of people, there's this rivalry between the Bay Area and LA. and obviously you mentioned this idea of don't go to Stanford or USC in the Berkeley area, which is, of course, based on a lot of rivalries, right? But
right, football, yeah.
What were you expecting to find in kind of growing up in the Bay Area and then going to school down in LA?
It's interesting, right? I mean, especially growing up so close to Berkeley, I mean, I think that really shaped my impression of, what college was like. So, a little bit of a city within a city, but my friends who went there also didn't, there's a whole lot of independence there, and I think there was not a lot of support, especially at that time. And so I would hear about, their classes being impacted, and they would be really stressed about trying to get the class that they needed to be able to graduate or to be able to,
at Berkeley,
get. Yeah, exactly. And so that was one thing that kind of worried me. And so when I was looking at colleges, that shaped a lot of my questions and, thinking about student-teacher interactions, how much access do you get to a professor, what types of things are you able to do, and essentially, like, how much stress are you going to have to take on in order to just be able to graduate, let alone any of the other things that I was sort of interested in being involved in outside of just academics. So I think when I visited USC and when I talked to people about it, I was surprised favorably that there was a lot more support there, and that it was a very different experience than I think what I had anticipated coming from and hearing from my friends at Cal. So,
no, that's good. That's good. And did you always know that you wanted to go into engineering, or was it always more of a healthcare focus? Was it like, obviously, I know your path. Maybe we should talk about it right now. So, BME for your undergrad, you go to Stanford School of Medicine. After that, I think you also did a graduate degree in business there, or just some sort of program?
No, that was it. I did an entrepreneurship program there, but it was a summer program. So it's now called Ignite. But yeah, I didn't do a separate degree focus. I did do a little bit of programming in the business school.
And then that leads to go from your medical degree to all of this healthcare business and entrepreneurship and healthcare consulting. And now I think you're doing venture capital now. That's what's going on. So there's a lot to discuss, but when you're we're talking about high school Tracy, right? You're just little Tracy, just hanging out in Berkeley. What was your thought at that time?
I think being a doctor, that was one of the things that really stuck with me from when I was little, and so that was really a big focus. And so, but the other thing that I really appreciated growing up was math and science. And then I also did a lot of music when I was in elementary school and high school. I mean, a lot of my friends actually ended up going to conservatories and becoming professional musicians. One of my best friends from elementary school was a cellist and at Juilliard, so I took a very different path that way, so when other people were taping, I was actually a little bit of the odd one. I was, applying to colleges.
Little
So,
weirdo.
but yeah, exactly, right. And I think, what really appealed to me now, looking back is music and engineering have a lot in common where you've got both the discipline that you need, but also the creativity, right? To be able to use the tools that you have at your disposal to be able to put things together in a new way. And that really appealed to me a lot more than what I felt was a more sort of traditional track to medical school, which is a straight biology major, take your MCAS to study, but there wasn't a whole lot of creativity there. And so that's what really drew me to engineering. So I think, from the get-go, I was really focused on colleges that had either really strong, potentially, math programs, but definitely engineering schools. And so that was a focus when I started looking at colleges.
In addition, sorry, go ahead.
No.
In addition to that idea of creativity and kind of using what's at your disposal and doing new things, we have a lot of students that talk to us from the high school perspective that are like, their goal is med school. And they say, I don't know, biology, life sciences. And obviously now these days in the life sciences, there's a new degree every year, right? There's biology, there's human performance, there's biochemistry, there's all these like just spins on biology, which makes it sound super exciting. And then there's biomedical engineering, and there's the fear that it's too hard, or it's not good preparation for med school. And given that you've done all this, obviously you've already talked a little bit about creativity, but what else would you want to tell those students?
I think that the field of medicine is both an art and a science. And I think that when you have a passion for something, and I hope you have a passion for medicine, because otherwise it's going to be pretty tough to get through med school if you're not passionate about it and to stick with it. So, when you're passionate, when you're committed about something, I think that you should really just think about what the best fit for you is, because then you'll be able to speak to that from a place of authenticity, and that'll come through in your interviews. That'll also come through, in your application, right? And I think, med schools see obviously tons of applicants, and when you're looking at an applicant that has a perfect GPA and things that look like they were done primarily for resume building purposes, and then you meet the person and they can't really speak to it from a place of why it matters to them, that's definitely taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, because you used to do interviews for Stanford Medicine, right?
Yeah. So they have student interviewers there the same way that, USC, you involve students in the application process. And so, so I have seen that. And it's been a long time since I've been in med school, but I think even now, right, med schools are moving more towards people who can bring a diverse set of experiences. They're, especially at Stanford, they looked at more non-traditional students as well. And so, maybe my GPA was a teeny bit lower than it might have been in, a different major. But, I think that they appreciated that I didn't take the easy way out, as it were, and coast, because, medicine is definitely not something where you can come in and do that. So I think, that demonstrates a work ethic and demonstrates a commitment to be able to try new things. So.
Were you ever nervous? Like, pre-med is already kind of hard enough, and I know, of course, engineering is super hard. Were you ever nervous that, like, oh my gosh, this is just another thing on my plate as kind of a young student? And since you kind of had that goal in mind, did you think about, ever switching out or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think there was, a lot of, anxiety because, just the whole I think anybody who tells you they don't have any anxiety about applying to med school, whether they're going to get in, is just either they've got ice in their veins or they're like super smart. But
or they just don't get it.
Right, exactly. So absolutely a lot of anxiety. I mean, I will say that taking the engineering pathway, I had to be very careful and very strategic about planning my classes so that I could get in all my prerequisites before I took the MCAT. So timing was a factor, but I mean, I was very supported. I ended up taking actually a lot of my GEs my senior year just because of that. But that was fine. I didn't have an issue getting any of the classes that I needed. So that was really helpful. So there was definitely planning involved, and that helped alleviate, a lot of the anxiety around the logistical part and the tactics. But, I think overall, just the path to going to med school is one that, is a challenge. And it really helps to have people who are supporting you through the whole process as well. And I felt that I really had that at Viterbi.
That's great.
So.
What do you remember the most about your time as a student here at USC?
Gosh, it was a long time ago now, right? I know, Paul, you and I have all.
We're very old. I know. Audrey, I was telling Audrey yesterday, with all these alumni interviews, it's just like, I'm sorry you have to sit through these horrible reminiscing, remember that one time in that one place when it was so cool?
It's okay. I'm learning a lot about USC a decade or two ago.
It's great. So,
we're going back 20 years here. We're going back 20 years.
Exactly, right? We're older than the entering freshman class, or we've known each other for longer than
we've known each other longer than this is what we did with Jason, because you were born what year?
1999.
1999. So we've known each other as almost as long as Audrey's been alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a junior.
Yeah. 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 And I think, but I think that's a great example right there, right? There are little things, and of course, 20 years out, there are things that stick out, but I think overall the thing that really stood out to me was just the sense of feeling at home, the sense of being able to try new things and do that without sort of negative repercussions, right? And to be able to have that ability to explore and to really just kind of take my college experience for, to do what I wanted to do with it and to explore a lot of different things. And I just felt really fortunate to have that. I didn't feel limited really in any sense. The limitation, I think, was more just, my time and how much I could commit to while, not, overextending myself, right? Yeah. But it was just a huge playground. And I think that, the culture that's built there and the infrastructure and the level of support, all the things, there are a lot of intangibles there that I felt supported by that you can't really quantify, but that's, I think, the biggest overarching thing that I remember from SC.
Now, when you were, I think last time I saw you here on campus, it must have been about a year ago, you had your daughter with you.
Yeah.
And she's adorable, by the way. And
so is yours.
Thank you. I think so. But when you bring her to campus, what do you point out to her? What stories do you, because she's almost 6 now?
Yeah, she's 6 next month, actually. Okay. Yeah. So, gosh, I obviously, first off is the engineering quad, and I point out to her OAG, right? And there are so many new buildings, right? Because when I was there, it wasn't Viterbi yet.
So different,
the engineering school. But so I point out to her the new buildings. I tell her, my cousin lived in Parkside. He was in film school, but I say, that's Uncle Kevin's door.
Oh, cool.
I show her, we go to Theater Hall, and I showed her a picture of Viterbi, and but it's the people, right? And so I have pictures of her with you and Louise, and on campus, and so she loves to soak it in. We stopped by Tommy Trojan and everything,
of course,
but
of course.
Definitely stopping by an engineering school first, but then just exploring, and I think that it's so magical at that age, and it takes me back too, right? Because it was a really great time in my life being on campus there. So
cool.
So after USC, did you stay around in the LA area or go straight back to the sort of Bay Area?
Yeah, so I went straight back to the Bay Area. I had gotten into med school, and so
so you basically just kept not following people's advice. She's like, no Stanford, no USC. So you start with USC and you go straight to Stanford after that.
Yeah, kind of. I was like, well, I guess.
The contrarian way.
So, but it was great to be back up near my family, even though I didn't have a whole lot of time to see them. But I spent my summer doing a really fun thing. I was in I was an RA for the New York Film Academy high school program, and so we were up
cool.
near Universal Studios. Yeah, just kind of doing that. So it was kind of fun for me to be exposed to that slice of LA after, not having been involved in that for a while. But yeah, it was great. And and then I went back up to Palo Alto and, started sort of the next phase of my academic training.
So what's med school like?
Gosh, it's hard to describe. I mean, it's complex, it's humbling, it's a period of really intense growth, right? And I mean, I think it's something that you should really only take on if you're passionate about it, because it's emotionally very challenging. You've got a big responsibility. Of course, you're learning a lot of information, but the information is not the end, right? It's just the tool that you're using in order to improve people's lives. And, the responsibility that comes with that is really huge. And so being in the clinic, being in the hospital, being privileged to touch people's lives in that way is pretty incredible, And so I think I did a lot of growing. I was in my early 20s when I graduated. And so I think that there are a lot of people who do take time off between undergrad and med school. And I think that's absolutely a great pathway. I was actually a little bit odd in that sense, in that I think there are only 5 people in our entering class of about 85 who would come straight from undergrad, and the rest of the people at Stanford had done research, or they'd worked for a number of years. I have good friends who are 10 years older than me, and they'd done a PhD before going to med school. So there are a lot of different paths. So mine was actually non-traditional in that class, in the sense that I went straight from undergrad. So, but I would say to anyone who's considering med school that you should just really follow what makes sense for you, and don't feel like there's pressure around timing a certain way, right? Because I think that there's a lot of life paths, and life experience will also help with what you're dealing with in medicine. So.
And so after you get the MD, do you go straight to work? Is this this idea of continuing your own punishment?
Kind of, yeah. I know it's the path that nobody would really sort of put together, but I guess from where I'm sitting now, it kind of follows it hard. But yeah, I actually went straight to work, which is also non-traditional. So when I was at Stanford, because we were in the Valley, and there was all this talk about, commercialization and startups, and how do you think about innovation? Yeah. And of course, I got involved in that, and it really struck me how, especially at that time, right, in the early 2000s, there was a really big disconnect between innovation that was happening in industry, and what was actually making it to the clinic and to the bedside, and what was able to actually impact patients' lives, right? And so I was really struck by that. And, medical training is something where you increasingly narrow your focus. You specialize, first in residency, and then a number of people go on to do subspecialties, and then you end up practicing in that field generally for a number of years, right? So, and I think the whole concept of breadth and depth, at USC really resonated with me personally as well. And so I wanted to expand rather than narrow my focus. So I'd always thought that might take more of a health policy bent. But once I was in the Valley, I thought that, sort of a commercial pathway might make more sense in that regard, and to sort of sit at the intersection of industry and the clinic to help people understand better what could be used by, the end users, what could actually benefit patients, and what could physicians actually use in the hospital to improve patients' lives. So with that in mind, I actually did another non-traditional thing, which is that I decided not to apply for the residency match. So while I do have the MD degree, I am not, board certified. I don't practice clinically. And so I started applying to jobs. And I ended up doing a couple years in investment banking, doing healthcare mergers and acquisitions. So my engineering background.
That's what you just do, right? Yeah, M&A. Just go.
I think I got a lot of interviews because, people were saying, well, this is really odd, so let's just talk to her because, we don't get a lot of med students applying. So that definitely put a different spin on, some of my interviews.
You probably had to overcome this initial sense of, because this is definitely not who you are, and I know this, so I want to like call this out to everybody, that like the spin of like, oh, she's a med school burnout, because that's not who you are. It's just that you have a very specific sense of what you want to do, and you're driving that the whole way. It's not like, oh, I can't do this anymore. That's not what happened.
Right. Yeah. And thanks for mentioning that, because, it's interesting because, 15, 20 years ago, right? I think now there's a lot more understanding of what you can do in, as you pointed out, right? Engineering is expanding, life sciences is expanding. And so there's a lot more integration of all these other different disciplines, around that. But at that time, it was very much more focused, and, it was pretty non-traditional to do anything outside of clinical practice.
Yeah.
So, and I just had the sense that there was something there, and I was really fortunate because being in the Valley, right, a lot of the people who were, who had set up, Stanford Biodesign, Paul Yock and Josh Nackauer, were physicians who were doing this exact thing and sitting at the intersection of medicine and industry. And so there were, several role models there. Yeah. But I had the feeling that, there was this big change coming, and there was a way to sort of to do that before it was necessarily defined well. And I think that being at Viterbi and being comfortable with taking calculated risks and being comfortable with that exploration and, and having a sense of, I'm an engineer, I can kind of create these things, right? Whether that's a career path or whether that's, different, kinds of research opportunities. I think that gave me, it was still anxiety inducing, but I think that background gave me a lot more comfort around, I can do something that's a certain amount of risk, and I feel comfortable taking that risk because the reward at the end can be really great. And I'm not talking about, monetary rewards either, right? Because I think, in banking, there is also, there's a stereotype that everybody is there for the money, right? Sure. But I think you can also use that as a stepping stone to other things. And so that, in effect, was my MBA equivalent, because after paying for med school, I didn't really want to take on a lot of additional debt for business school. But I did get a fair bit of that skill set by working in that industry before I transitioned, by working in banking before I transitioned to industry.
I think what's interesting is that stuff you just touched on is that there's so many buzzwords related to that tend to stem from Silicon Valley. One of which is disruption, right? We're gonna disrupt this model. We're gonna disrupt this industry. We're going to, even the idea of Facebook, break everything, or what, I forget what their motto is.
Yeah, move fast and break things.
Move fast and break things. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so everything's based on that, and that's so, just commonplace now. But I think it's what you're getting to is at the core of it. This is what when you look back on it, although that was probably never your plan, like, oh, I'm going to be the great disruptor. It was just this idea of, I'm going to pursue things that are interesting to me. I'm going to be continuing to engage. I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to, at the end of the day, develop a skill set, and then I'm going to use that skill set in a place that continues to challenge and engage me in that same way. So like there's this positive feedback loop of rigor, reward. And if you saw med school, if I'm putting words in your mouth, but you saw med school in this path of residency, this idea of like, no, that's routine. There's no rigor reward there after that. That's just the reward and then routine of being a doctor. Nothing bad against doctors, obviously. But for your life, you're saying, no, I want to do something different. And so you started disrupting your own traditional career path. And that's definitely the case now. And I think that the one thing that's a common denominator of anyone that's ever, whether we look over decades, hundreds of years, or even just the last 15, anyone that is at the core or at the pivot point of disruption always has an engineering background, because there's this idea of think a little bit differently, go beyond the status quo, try to figure out how to solve this problem And even that's in your everyday life. So I think that's what's really cool about this, is that specifically for anyone listening who is thinking about med school, they tend not to think that way, or they feel weird if they do. They're like, well, med school's got a straight path. Everybody goes down this one path, and engineering can be part of that path, but it can also provide you with a different educational background that makes you think a little bit differently. And that's at its core what engineering does. It rewires your brain a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with everything you said, and it actually shapes how I talk about my career trajectory in interviews too. I think you mentioned a little bit of that, and we can talk about that later, but really I think the things that shape how I make decisions about what my next step is are not what is the title and, what is the reward in that sense, but there are a few things, right? One is that people are at the center of it, especially for me. Like, so who am I going to be working with? Who am I going to be interfacing with, right? Yeah. So that is pretty much the overarching thing that I consider, right? So I need to have a good team, a good manager. That element of having a group that you can trust and you can learn from is really critical to me. And I think that really stems from my time at USC and being able to be in that kind of environment where, there's a lot of support and people have their backs and you're tackling tough things. But when you're tackling tough problems with, colleagues who are all, sort of driven to the same mission, then I think that's incredibly helpful, right? So there's a huge difference between having people who are, all in it for the same reason versus people who might have sort of their own agendas. So people are definitely first, right? That's the one first thing. Second thing is, where can I learn, right? Where am I going to have a good learning experience? And, there are a number of people who've talked about things like this. I think Sheryl Sandberg referenced, your career path is sort of a jungle gym, right? Not a ladder. But really it's when you take the opportunity to have different learning experiences and to step outside your comfort zone, then that will end up rewarding you in ways that you could probably never have imagined when you started it, right? So I think looking for the learning opportunities and being okay with taking that element of risk, is a calculated risk, right, is really important. And so those are sort of really the two big things, right? And then, I think the mission-driven piece and the values piece is obviously sort of underpinning all of that, right? I think from the very beginning, I'd wanted to do something that impacts patients. And, so healthcare for me was really at the heart of all of that, and so it was always aligned around how can I use those, how can I use my skill set in service of, other people, and while also thinking about these two filters around good people and a learning experience. So that's really sort of what's driven how I've shaped my career path,
It's cool. It's really good advice.
Yeah.
So investment banking, M&A, and then you kind of go, I think from there you kind of went down health companies. Is it Novartis or is it something related to vaccines, correct?
Yeah. I was at Novartis Diagnostics. And so I was in banking for about a year and a half, 2 years. And at that point, I ended up taking on a role as chief of staff to the president of Novartis Diagnostics. And so the chief of staff role, for those, it's more common now, but it's basically essentially being the chief operating officer for that one, executive. So you shadow them, you do special projects, you lead a lot of strategy in my particular role. And so you're really intimately involved in the business at a level that, people earlier in their careers are generally not. Right. And so getting that insight and getting that insight into how to navigate a really large organization, being able to learn from, my manager's, decades of experience and, his tips on, and just being able to see how he managed things. I think that was really, really impactful for me because that really accelerated my learning, and it also helped me understand the business better to be able to, see the entire business and then understand sort of where I wanted to craft my next steps within that.
And then were those next steps going straight into the consulting arena? Is that Opus or?
No, I stayed at Novartis for about 6 years. So after that the chief of staff strategy role. I ended up leading first training and education, where I then had a customer-facing field force, and then I led global operations there. Wow. And then our division was acquired by Grifols, and so it was a couple of years of integration where we basically overhauled all our internal customer relationship management systems. So that was a lot of stuff that I never thought I would be doing when I set out, but it was all really interesting and all great experiences. And so actually, and then after I had my daughter, I was widowed a year after that. And that was obviously a really big life change. My husband was in a car accident, so it was quite unexpected. And so here I was with a 1-year-old. And just to kind of go back to where, your network and your village really end up being an incredible source of support. I mean, my friends from USC, my friends at work, my entire team, I had so much support, right? And so I was really fortunate to be in that situation, even with something so crazy happening, in my life.
Tragic.
So, but I mean, it was a couple of things, right? On the professional side, this intersection of healthcare and technology had been happening for a while, especially up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I was looking at that, and I was really interested in exploring the digital health world. And it turned out that, especially after the integration and the acquisition of Grifols, it made sense to say, okay, I've had a good run. I've been here almost 7 years, and now's the time for me to take on something a little bit riskier. And,
there it is again. There it is
right?
again.
So yeah, you're sensing a theme, right? So I think, right, it's the rigor reward. And so you have to be able to, you don't have to, but it's my personality to want to sort of push myself a little bit. And it was definitely a challenge because, everything was moving at the same time, right? My personal life, and I really questioned whether I should just be sitting back and taking a stable job somewhere and, and not thinking about this for, just kind of, not, and just sort of getting back on my feet for the next few years. But I think, intrinsically, that didn't really fit with who I was. And so I was actually more comfortable in this cycle of challenge yourself and dig in and really focus on that to be able to learn something new. And so I went out as a consultant. I had worked with the Novartis Digital Accelerator Lab a little bit, and I worked with as a consultant, and then the Gates Foundation as well, consulting for them to think about how do you assess new innovative opportunities in diagnostics, and how do you think about applying that in the global health world in low and medium income countries where they don't have the access to the technologies that we necessarily have here.
So were you essentially, for lack of a better term, scouting out opportunities for investments on their behalf as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation?
So they have a specific role called a program officer, and one of my former colleagues from Novartis, and we'd worked together pretty closely, she was in this role, right? And so we were doing a little bit of both, right? Both assessing what the needs were, and then also looking at, potential technologies that could come in. But it was very, very early stage because we were looking at things that could potentially, come out of academia, and be applied, or things that could be commercialized, but not necessarily in the traditional sense. Because typically when you think about early stage companies here, the venture-backed ones, they need to focus on a market that's where the economics make sense for them to go after it. And, there was a lot of learning for me there, especially in the global health world. We'd already worked with ministries of health and, various country healthcare organizations during my time at Novartis and Grifols, but the Gates Foundation has a very, very clear focus on that. So that was a great opportunity to do that too.
That's awesome.
Kind of one midway question. I think engineers and perhaps medical students as well, maybe you can kind of tend to be risk adverse. I know I can be that way too, because, after graduation, you could have taken an engineering job, or after you got your MD, you could have kind of stayed on that path of becoming a doctor. What would your advice be to students who maybe are kind of thinking about doing something else, but when you kind of have a career path locked in, to jump off into something else can be scary.
This is great, especially for Audrey to hear, because Audrey and I talk a lot about it's okay to do something a little bit different. Like it's okay to not worry about that, that type thing.
Yeah. I mean, it is scary, right? And I think everybody has to think about where their comfort level is with that. And I think one way that I started framing it to myself is that it's really about investing in yourself, and yourself best, right? So I think that you've got your engineering skill set, and nobody can take that away from you, right? So if the worst case scenario might be, okay, for example, you graduate and instead of taking the engineering degree, you decide to do something a little bit different. I mean, maybe you go to Teach for America, or maybe you go to grad school or something like that. Your engineering skill set is not going to go away, right? It will be enriched and enhanced by the experience that you have after it, just as it's enriched and enhanced by the experiences that you have during, your undergrad days, right? So I think that all those layers of things together build to give you, sort of a unique experience, and then being able to bring together insights from disparate parts of your life can also come together in really surprising and rewarding ways too, So there's nothing wrong with being traditional at all, right? And I think that, it makes sense for a lot of people. And I think there's a reason why, it is traditional, because it makes sense for so many people. And, but, people take risk in different ways, right? Some people go, bungee jump on the weekends or what have you. Some people, push the envelope in different ways. And so I think it depends on what makes sense for you, really, but it's okay to think about it for a while. And I mean, I definitely did it. It wasn't like I made these decisions by, fly by the seat of my pants, right? Once I had an inkling, of a pathway that I might be interested in, then I would, explore that and think about it a lot and talk to people about it. So using the resources that you have to connect with people who have done similar things, or who are in a different industry, or, following a different path, that also gives you a lot of insight, because then you can sort of test it without much risk at all, and understand if that makes sense for you. So
that's great. And so kind of at this point in your career where you're doing more sort of global health in that field, how did you feel your engineering degree was sort of kickstarting that or contributing to that field of work?
Yeah, I mean, it really underpins everything, I think, right? The broader concept of, discipline and creativity. So right now I'm a venture partner at Avestria Ventures. We're a life science fund, and we invest in early stage, seed and Series A, early stage life science companies that focus on either women's health or female founders in the life sciences. So, I mean, I feel like my whole background has really, all the various pieces have really come together. And so even though, I'm not treating people as a doctor on a daily basis, right? I'm not necessarily doing engineering problem sets, on a daily basis. It all comes together in the sense of, understanding the technologies, really thinking about where their place is in the market, whether it makes sense in, a broader clinical arena, things like that, and also thinking about the teams, right? Is this the right team to take this product forward, right? And how are they building the business, and how are they thinking about it strategically? So it's really funny, how things tend to come together that way.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So going back on Audrey's question earlier, there's an interesting layer to what we were just talking about being risk adverse, and the current generation of high school students, K through 12 education, and I don't want to call it grade inflation, but an obsession with GPA, all based on this idea of higher GPA means better chance of admission to college. And even college, even high schools are doing this idea of adding points to GPA. And you see these GPAs coming. I was reading applications last night, and this kid's got a 4.97. What?
Oh my God.
Like what? And then you look at it, and it's just because they added all these points whatever.
Wow.
And so So I don't know if there's a question here, or if this is just more of a statement, and give me your thoughts. But this idea of is it being risk adverse? Is it finding the least amount of risk for your next steps? But also this idea of, is this the A choice, right? Like if I get these two job offers, which one's the right one? Which one's the right answer? Which one's the A? Not so much risk adverse, but which one is, I've always been an A student, so therefore my choices in life therefore need to be A choices, if that makes any sense. And we see that so much when they come into college, this idea of just tripping a little bit, and then we're like, it's fine, it's okay. But this idea of like really, really having wellness issues as a result of that. This is not a USC specific thing. This is just college in general. And then that's starting to translate out into the workforce. And we see our seniors at their highest points of stress when they're dealing with the most amazing amount of opportunities and choices. And it's like, I don't know which one's going to be the best one, because if I don't make the best choice, I'm a failure.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because I think that word failure is just carries so much weight with it, right?
It does.
But I think it's so important to be able to fail, and to fail, fail early and fail often, in a lower risk environment, so that you get used to that feeling, right? Yeah. And I think that, absolutely, I agree with everything you said, right? As I obviously I don't have as close of a lens on it as you do, but when you track metrics, then and there are things that get measured, then people start to gravitate towards those things as sort of the ultimate arbiter of what is good versus bad, right? Yeah. And there's so many things that are intangible and that add to your experience, right? And that's actually outside of the academic environment where grades are that metric, right? I mean, yes, there are performance reviews and things like that, right? But really what matters is, can you and your team and the people around you achieve what you're setting out to do? Right. And there's going to be failure along the way, right? Like everybody's going to fail at some point. And younger students have had, just because they're younger, have had less of an opportunity to have some of those failures, right? But there's a reason why, in the Valley, people tend to be more comfortable with serial entrepreneurs, even though they've failed at certain things, right? Because that gives you a rich experience. It shows you what you can do better next time. It gives you insights into how you can improve, and sometimes it gives you insights into how you can change a system and deliver completely new things as well, right? So I think failure is really valuable in and of itself too. And so this shying away from failure and kind of being so focused on the metrics and the GPA is unfortunately kind of a detriment.
So not to contradict what you just said, because I don't think it's a contradiction, but I think it's just an interesting paradox that exists in the same place. In Silicon Valley, this idea of being more comfortable with failure because of serial entrepreneurs, and this idea of like, oh, we're just trying new things and it's always about move fast and break things. There's also this similar larger correlation of that, what I just mentioned, this idea of no failure with the kids. And there's some sort of idea of where there is affluence or highly resourced communities that you see this type of involvement in schools and private schools. And I mean, the amount of private schools that exist in San Jose itself is because this one started because this other one weren't producing as many successful students. So they just kind of keep creating their little pockets, and it's not exactly how it works, but you just tend to see that. Mm-hmm. And then you go to other highly resourced communities around the country and you see the same thing. And why is that at the same place in Silicon Valley? Why do we have this idea of entrepreneurial efforts and fail early, fail often is also producing a younger generation of students that just are also obsessed with metrics and success?
Yeah. Well, so I should probably qualify, when we talk about the Valley and everything like that, right? I mean, the stats don't lie, right? So over 95% of startups are actually going to fail, right? Yeah. And there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are, there are a lot of people in the Valley who, first of all, are also not entrepreneurs, right? And than a lot of them who are not successful entrepreneurs. And I mean, I'm not one personally either, right? So, I mean, but it's statistically, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get very few people who are successful entrepreneurs. And so there's, I think despite this, you know, the thinking around, okay, yeah, move fast and break things, right? I mean, it's people still want to, you know, make sure that their kids don't fail, you know, in a sense that'll affect them, you know, significantly. You know, but I think also one of the things too is when you think about the social emotional development, and when you think about people's ability as they get older to be able to interface with people from sort of all walks of life, right? You know, especially if you're thinking about medicine, right? You need to be able to really quickly get to the heart of what it is that matters to your patient, right? And going back to the part around it's an art and a science, right? I mean, if you can't get your patient to talk to you, or if they don't feel comfortable being truthful with you, then you don't have the information that you need to sometimes make a correct diagnosis or to help them in the way that you could, right? And so that level of human connection is not something that you can train necessarily or measure by it. I mean, you can definitely practice that, and there are more and more courses now in medicine and medical schools across the country that are geared towards really helping people have a better, you know, bedside manner and being able to connect with patients. But you know, in some sense, these parents are doing their kids a disservice because they're focusing on one thing, perhaps to the exclusion of others, you know.
Yeah. So,
and I think, you know, sometimes the kids might not be able to understand enough of the world around them to be able to say, hey, I want to push back, and this is not absolutely, you know, what matters to me. And, you know, it's hard to have a real passion for something when, you know, you're 13 or 14 or 15, right?
You're not supposed to at
you
that
know,
point.
You know, my passion is hanging out with my friends,
Exactly.
right? But, you know, the parents want the best for their kids, but I think you know, the pendulum swings, you know. So
well, it starts now, like, you know, kindergarten age, right? You know,
mm-hmm.
like we all worry about this idea of like, okay, what is she gonna do? What's her thing? What's her thing? We're gonna try this. We're gonna try that. What's the thing? And we're perpetuating that cycle in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so we always have to like be mindful of, they're just kids. It's okay. They don't, you know. But then around you, you've got this it's a keeping up with the Joneses type environment where all of a sudden, like, well, you know, that kid's been in gymnastics for 2 years, and so obviously, you know, she's going to have an advantage over my daughter. So maybe it's not gymnastics just yet. So it's really a weird, horrible cycle to get into.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. You know, and I think it's interesting because I think, you know, engineering medicine has definitely impacted how I parent too, you know, because, you know, we're doing the same thing, right? You know, gymnastics and piano lessons and things like that. But I think it's also, I'm trying to emphasize that we're approaching it from a sense of let's explore, right? Let's explore and let's have an adventure. And if you don't like it, that's okay, but it's really good to try.
Right.
And it's, you know, and it's also, you know, and sometimes, you know, you kind of want to have them fail on purpose a little bit, you know, and just say, hey, you know, whatever, the picture didn't come out exactly the way you wanted, but, you know, let's make something else out of it. And I think that, you know, a lot of it is in the framing as well.
Totally.
You know?
Totally.
So,
you're doing all these things, and at the same time, you start to get involved back in the Viterbi School in the Emerging Leader Board. So I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about ELB and what that is, and also where you're taking it and what you're doing, because you're the current chair of the Emerging Leader Board.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ali Fakari, who was the founding chair and who was on the podcast a couple episodes ago, and also a great friend of mine from undergrad. Shout out to Ali. Ali and Dean Yortzos conceived of and set up the Emerging Leader Board, I think, about 6 years ago. And so when Ali called me up and said, hey, this is something that we're interested in doing, would you be interested in getting involved? You know, I said, yeah, sure. You know, because like I said, right? Great people and, you know, something interesting, and I'm going to learn something new. So all the boxes were checked for me, so it wasn't hard. And of course, I love Viterbi, right? And so we were really sort of putting together, a group of diverse alumni who had different backgrounds. And I think after, Ali sort of had put together that foundation, we really wanted to think about how do you start using this critical mass of alumni who have all these different experiences, and how do you use us as essentially alumni ambassadors for the school, and to be this conduit between the alumni population and the school as well, and also for people who are thinking about the school but might not be as familiar with Viterbi. So I think, even more and more now, community is so important, even though we've got technology and infrastructure that can allow us to talk to people on video, right? Halfway the world and all these other things. I mean, there's still that element of human connection that makes a big difference. And you can't replicate that same energy, right? And so it really helps to have people who, embody that energy and who represent various facets of the school, and who can also continue to represent that as it goes forward. I mean, as we talked about, it's a long time ago, and so I'm not the best person to answer questions about what the school is like now. Even though it makes me want to go back and do another degree just to see all of it. But so I mean, there's so much that goes on, and there's so many great experiences that people have had at the school, and I think it's what we really want to do is turn the ELB into something where we're serving as, I think, the word ambassador really fits, to be able to build that community in the alumni population as well.
Well, you are doing great work, and especially with a lot of the moving and changing and kind of like shifting of the ELB over the last year or so as you've taken over. And obviously, I can't thank you enough for helping with us on the admission side and helping us put together our alumni event last year. And hopefully we can look forward to doing another one this year and some other cool stuff. So again, I mean,
absolutely.
It's, you have done so many amazing things, not only just here, but afterward and medicine and industry and just this idea of seeking rigor and this idea of constantly challenging yourself, I think is a really fantastic story. And just the fact that I think you should know that no one would have done what you've done, and you're just quite honestly an amazing person, and congratulations on so much that you've accomplished and so many things that you're going to continue to accomplish.
Well, thanks, Paul. It all started at USC at Viterbi, right? So I've got that foundation thing. So yeah, it's been fantastic, working with you too, and it's been lovely having this conversation. So
absolutely, thanks
again for having me on. And if anybody wants to apply to the ELB, you can email us at viterbielb@gmail.com. If there's any Viterbi alums that want to get involved with Tracy and her role. And definitely or find me on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn, and we keep adding the VSA alums to that list, right?
Yeah.
all the student ambassadors tend to. I pass the names on to Tracy, and then she takes them on.
Yeah. Plug for we were the VSAs before we were VSA, so I think that first class 99, right, Paul? So 20th anniversary.
Yeah. 01.
Okay. 01.
Yeah. So we're not there yet.
We'll do a 20-year reunion.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll make a 20-year reunion. That's what this podcast thing will start to generate.
Yes.
So
I love it.
Very cool. Well, thanks, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, Audrey. It's lovely talking to you.
All right, that was a great episode.
I loved it. So I don't know how much you knew about Tracy before we started this, but what are your thoughts on Tracy in general?
Yeah, I think really inspirational story of kind of challenging herself the whole way. I kind of knew a little bit of her professional path, but I think honestly kind of inspiring to take risks the whole time. She talked about really thinking through risk taking, which I think, we can struggle with, especially Paul and I talked about, kind of coming out of school, you're obsessed with getting A's, getting the best grades. And that's not quite how the real world works, as Tracy gets into. So, just honestly, just inspiring. I think that's the best way to describe it. Yeah,
I mean, I think we stopped many times throughout the conversation and kind of summarized what we were thinking. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's a lot of that's needed at this point, other than, this idea of go after things that interest you and that aren't easy.
Yeah.
And when you do that, when you have that idea of engagement in your life, there is fulfillment. And fulfillment creates this idea of happiness or kind of a place in the world. And when you have that level of fulfillment and a place in the world, then you have the opportunity to pivot and do even cooler things.
Yeah.
It's a real fantastic lesson of, when you're comfortable, is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. But if you're comfortable and constantly seeking something new, that could be career-wise, that could be volunteering, that could be just changing up hobbies and activities. So just recognizing that your whole idea of wellness, which we touched on lightly in this episode, but really what this discussion was this idea of wellness, and how I think Tracy, without her ever being really cognizant of it as she did it, she was constantly seeking her own equilibrium. Mm-hmm. And that's not a level of comfort, but that's an idea of where am I going to be? How many plates do I spin to find my engagement with my brain? And everybody's different about that. And I think that there's one thing that's a lesson out of this, is that everybody tends to benchmark themselves against who they're around. And sometimes they feel like they're not doing enough. Like, he's spinning 8 plates and she's spinning 9 plates, but I'm only spinning 7. Well, maybe the 7 is what you're supposed to do. And maybe that's rigorous enough for you. And maybe the plates can be different, or what they're going to be what they're involved in. So just, constantly find those levels of balance and rigor and reward. And I think that if anybody is wondering what they want to do with their life when they're incredibly smart, Tracy's an interesting model to look at, and someone that you can gain inspiration from, because she's constantly said, where am I going to find that fulfillment of my day-to-day? Because ultimately that's how I'm going to fulfill my whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good one.
All right. Well,
thanks, everyone.
Thank you.